Good evening, Chelsea fans. We're back with another pod as the side steep to new lows, exiting Europe at the hands of PSG and stalling in the league once again versus Everton. We're going to analyse these most recent defeats for Chelsea as the side make it four on the bounce. We'll also take a closer look at some of the recent turmoil surrounding the club and the heightened ridicule around manager Liam Rosenior. We'll be discussing the elephant in the room with returning guest Joey Scanion. Enzo Fernandez, who's fueled further speculation around an exit this summer and whether he's even good enough for a move elsewhere. Let's get into it.
Everton 3, Chelsea nil. I had the rare pleasure of missing this one, actually. A candlelit dinner by the Colosseum in Rome. But I gather it was a colossal bloodbath at the Hill Dickinson Stadium. How did this one play out, Ryan?
That's pretty accurate summary if I'm honest. I think this is a performance and a result that's been very much on the cards for a few weeks now, and in all honesty, it could have been more. Everton squandered a whole host of chances that we presented and laid for them on a plate within the first sort of opening phases of the game. And honestly, since about minute 73 in that first tie against PSG, this entire team has just completely lost their heads and regressed into total mental weaklings, as we've previously seen with Chelsea teams, billion-pound blue bottle jobs, etc. And I think the root of Chelsea's issue is not particularly complex. You know, we fundamentally have a shit team and a crap starting 11 we're fielding each week, and even worse options off the bench. I mean, when that lineup dropped, I did a combined 11 from available players in both teams' squad on the day, Everton and Chelsea, and the only players actually from a Chelsea perspective, form, injuries, etc., that made it into that X11 was Cucurella, Caicedo, Estevao, and João Pedro at a push. I mean, Pickford's better than Robert Sanchez and Jorgensen. The centre back options, Everton are far, far ahead of Chelsea in that department as well. Tarkowski, Keane, Braithwaite, etc. James Garner absolutely showing Enzo Fernandez how it's done. And Iliman Ndiaye and Dewsbury Hall, ultimately, I would take absolutely at left wing and central attacking midfielder for Chelsea over Palmer right now. This is a very spoilt, tired, and demoralised set of players that simply aren't up for the fight and absolutely are not heeding what the new manager, Liam Rosenior, is asking of them. He's trying to implement a different style, a much higher defensive line and pressing teams. And then we're seeing a number of goals conceded now that are very similar, with just sort of a simple pass from deep positions through our entire team that cuts through everyone. The better goal was another example of what we've seen in recent weeks with Sam Smith from a Wrexham perspective, Anthony Gordon's tap in for Newcastle against us last week. So there's no cohesion in defence and no cohesion in forward positions. We saw Palmer throwing his arms up at Neto when he took the ball off him again. No sort of patterns to our play. Looking at overlaps and crossing the ball into the box where we got no one there. So it's pretty hopeless in all regards, really. I want to call out a couple of performances. Wesley Fofana, absolutely disgusting performance. There's one positive from this whole situation is that people have finally woken up to just how overrated and what a fraud this man is. And Enzo Fernandez with a truly disastrous performance once again and getting completely shown up by Everton's midfield and second best in all regards.
You mentioned that Jorgensen selection being sort of the beginning, the domino effect, the unravelling of Rosenior's Chelsea in recent weeks. That lineup dropped, the notification in my pocket, walking around Rome. Fofana and Hato, centre back. Really, I say Hato much improved of late. You're talking about a centre back pairing that not only is going to compete in the set pieces up against your Tarkovskis, your O'Briens at right back, Keane. But yes, Beto or Barry, neither vintage top centre forwards, but one thing's for sure, they are going to give you a physical battle out there, and it's a total mismatch from the get-go from a selection perspective. A Tosin or a Josh made far more sense purely from a physical comparison. I mean that Trev Chalobah omission enforced, but there's options there, and it just clearly looked like the wrong option. the really stark, worrying element that became clear to me early on was the fact that we're being dominated by this Everton side. So I mentioned a momentum chart. I've since watched the game back in full. Everton all over us, dominating possession, pressing high, etc. And both Everton, much improved of late, but particularly David Moyes' sides, they're always going to be canny, they're always going to be dangerous. But I'm not sure you slash anyone worth their salt expects to be dominated by this Everton side.
The
I think there
tone,
was
I should
a
just jump in there, George. The tone was set in the first 10 minutes. You say we were being dominated. It wasn't due to Everton going on the front foot and just taking the game to Chelsea. It was a case of, Sanchez getting caught on the ball, dillying around. It was Caicedo giving the ball away. Primarily, it was Fofana completely lackadaisical defending, just not taking a proper touch and losing possession, and that sets the tone for the entire game. It's individual errors which you just can't account for at all.
I think there was a seriously ominous stat post game that Chelsea have been outrun in every single game by every opponent in this Premier League season. As you say, that start being so key, we've criticised slow starts of the bridge, be it for lack of atmosphere. Is it lack of preparation, lack of intent, or are we going to pander to the Club World Cup tax excuse, this idea that it's been a long, long season? We are talking about one of the largest squads assembled in Premier League history here.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much I read into that particular data point. I mean, on the face of it, yes, we're being outrun by opponents, but ultimately Aston Villa had run several miles more than Chelsea when we beat them 4-1 and completely dominated them for a large portion of that game. I think that particular insight has more to do with Chelsea's style of play, which is very, retention of possession first. Which is often our particular area of complaint, that it's slow build up, turgid, keeping the ball in non-threatening positions, but potentially has the effect of meaning we have to run less in the game. But that's not completely absolving. There are several instances where players are simply not putting in the effort. Most pertinently, obviously, as we discussed last week, Wesley Fofana against Newcastle, just jogging back for a clear goal scoring opportunity to the opposition. So there undoubtedly is a factor of that. There is an element of fatigue across the squad. I mean, it's so clear to see that we're not capable of dealing with the fixture overload and the limited rotation. You build a big squad to be able to contend with this number of fixtures and the high volume of games coming each week. But the quality is simply not good enough. You're never going to start a Liam Delap. You're never going to start your, Jorrel Hatto in a big game away from home. It's a case where we simply can't rotate players because the quality is not there on the bench, and it's resulting in fatigue and a general demise around the club.
I think you make a great point around lack of pragmatism, us being hell bent on playing this possession football, recycling the ball from the get go from minute one. I think it was Malo Gusto with a really sloppy, careless backwards pass that instigated that first Everton attack of the game within 30 seconds. Looking at PSG twice now, and actually strikingly, Manchester City in that cup final against Arsenal at the weekend, both Vitinha and then Bernardo Silva essentially opting from the kickoff to pump the ball into the opposition half. So probably the two pioneering philosophers in terms of possession-based football, possibly the two top sides in Europe the past few years, conceding that from the get-go, that minute one, actually it's favourable to put the opposition, get them on the back foot, almost in rugby style, gain some territory, press in the right places. And yes, footballers are human. Attempting to play out exquisitely from the get-go, minute one, in a raucous atmosphere is just not clever. It's naivety there, and it's something that Rosenior seems to be persistent on and needs to have a think about over this international break. But it's killing us, and as you say, not helped by the nonchalant, casual gimmick and lack of seriousness that we've seen consistently from, particularly, I'd say, Gusto and Wes Fofana.
Do you think that's curtains for Champions League qualification. I mean, when you look at the table on the face of it, we're still somehow in a decent enough position and touching distance of Liverpool in particular and Aston Villa in those coveted spots. There's even the possibility of Aston Villa winning the Europa League, and that unlocks an additional Champions League place for sixth place. But in our current trajectory, Brentford breathing down our necks, Everton, I think, are 2 or 3 points behind us now. Newcastle not that far off. I can't even see us holding on to sixth at this current trajectory and the fixtures coming up.
Does feel like it's completely unraveling. The fact that our competition seems to be doing the absolute most to fail to take advantage of our slip ups, I guess, is the only consolation. So, I mean, barring that Villa result where they actually, I say, showed a bit of steel, a bit of nerve. I mean, it's about time they took some points themselves, beat West Ham, who were informed themselves. But beyond that, as you say, you saw Liverpool screwing up that we failed to capitalise on. Even we spoke last week of a resurgent Newcastle, them crumbling against a sort of below strength Sunderland outfit. Brentford, I think they've failed to score a goal in their sort of last couple of games, back to back to back draws against the likes of Wolves, etc. So other sides aren't capitalising. But with that Villa win, with United sort of continuing to tick along, it does feel like we are competing for that one spot. You mentioned that potential edge case scenario of Villa opening up sixth. I believe they'd need to come fifth. So realistically, it's going to be down to us whether we can kick on. And those back-to-back ties now against the two Manchester clubs, yes, at the Bridge. You'd have to say you've got to be grateful for this international break. We've got to take stock, recoup, and see if we can go again with, so hopefully a renewed vigor and freshness in the squad. Probably the one positive from that game was the eventual appearance of Esteval, who looks scintillating and sort of really made you question and decry his absences of late in the crucial part of the season.
Chelsea nil, Paris Saint-Germain 3, dumped out the Champions League, and in all honesty, that result probably flattered us, given how that game panned out, George. The biggest gulf I think I've ever seen between Chelsea and another side. I think it just ultimately highlighted that we're simply not cut out for this level of football.
I mentioned I was in Rome for that Everton game. There was further divine intervention here, whereby a ticket mix-up dictated that my brother and we were actually denied entrance at the bridge, which ultimately, I say, proved to be a blessing in disguise. We still, however, had the misfortune of watching this one in the Boozer on Fulham Broadway nearby, and it was a disaster. I think Sanchez was rightly reinstated for this one, but instead you had Mamadou Sarr representing the latest of a litany of surprise selections deployed at right back. And right on cue, just 6 minutes in, he makes a mess of the most routine of interceptions. Kvaratskhelia picking up where he left off in Paris. And the mountain ultimately became insurmountable just 8 minutes later. A banger from Barcola after Caicedo gets caught in midfield. Chelsea's frantic, overzealous approach saw us getting carved open at will. It felt like a cricket score was a real possibility here. Less than 15 minutes into the game, you're looking at damage limitation mode as a fan already in a last 16 Champions League tie, the nights that we dreamed of, the nights we've paid 80 quid for. The rare joy we did have, ironically, did come from route one balls from Sanchez, obviously lacking in that first leg, fateful tie in Paris. I think you saw Sanchez to João in behind Pacho with a near post strike denied. Palmer later creating a yard that was denied by a top save from Safanov. And ultimately any chance of that, say, unlikely remontada was distinguished. You saw Sarr hooked at half time, but more significantly, the stars, say in quotation marks, Cole, João, and Enzo were hooked on 60 minutes. So there's a clear admission of defeat here on the biggest stage. This was emphasised by the sight of League One Liam and Garnacho trotting onto the pitch. So the two of them actually had a fair few chances. It was instead 19-year-old Parisian sub Seni Mayulu who lashes home from the edge of the box. And what followed was a comical succession of saves from Safanov. Ultimately, it felt like a mid-off from the Chelsea forwards, scuffing chance after chance after chance into Safanov's midriff. I have to say, the lads at the sort of local para league can hit a ball better. 3-0 full time, 8-2 on aggregate. Totally unacceptable, as John Terry was quick to point out post game.
Tell you what, some of that finishing from PSG, Mayulu and Barcola, similar to Barcola in the first leg and Kvaratskhelia as well, just utterly devastating, aren't they? I mean, it's an old cliche that you get punished at this level for mistakes, and never has that rung more true than against PSG at home. As you say, the game was pretty much a dead rubber by well, before the game, really, from that 5-2 defeat in Paris, but in particular after 5 or 6 minutes when Kvaratskhelia capitalizes on that mistake from Mamadou Sarr, question marks over whether he should have been playing in that game. But one particular sort of highlight, memeable clip or point of ridicule for Chelsea once again was that image of Garnacho coming on minute 83, 8-2 down on aggregate and he's passing notes on to Garnacho, like as if there's anything tactically that can be salvaged at that point. I just thought that was bizarre once again, and we'll get on to managers, ages men, whatever you want to call him, Liam Rosenior. But yeah, it was a night of real ignominy for Chelsea and just public humiliation. Really, I felt I had mentally switched off after 10 minutes.
You mentioned the comparative clinicality. So some ridiculous strikes from PSG, particularly in this game. I'm sure you've seen, but the XG philosophy confirmed that over the two legs, Chelsea actually edged the XG. So
What
on
does that
one hand,
say? What does that
yeah,
say
I mean,
about
oh,
XG?
exactly. Let's break that down. So on one hand, it just reiterates the discrepancy in quality. Those shocking signings from our sporting directors, your Delaps, your Garnachos, in stark contrast to those elite forwards at PSG. So I mean, Ballon d'Or winner Dembele, Kvaratskhelia, a player we were linked with. But on top of that, some serious homegrown talent. I mentioned Mayulu, 19 years of age, scoring in that Champions League final, and again, just there. But second element to that XG statistic, there's value in looking at the, say, clinicality of individuals. But what those XG score lines really hide is the sort of concept of convergence. So clearly Chelsea are completely out of sight. 2-0 down, 3-0 down on the night, 8-2 on aggregate. And as a result, you've got PSG sort of chilling out, making changes, inviting pressure. But ultimately, if we're honest, had that scoreline been closer, there's no way PSG would have been letting up such chances. So definitely a slight critique on that metric there that many seem to hold on to and breed revisionism of. But as you say, this felt like a total mismatch. I think there's been comparisons made with that performance under Lampard at the Allianz or against Bayern over two legs.
Yeah.
That Bayern side was one of the best I've ever seen in person. So COVID tax that year, I mean, they were scintillating. I do think you have to concede that this PSG side, say particularly the forwards, obviously missing a top keeper, you'd argue, and Fabian Ruiz improves that, but they are undoubtedly a top outfit with elite forwards and a model, say, that we've sort of attempted to mimic, but ultimately got crucially wrong at both the top end and the back end of the pitch. So those elite forwards, and then on top, he was absent in that Club World Cup final, but Pacho is a serious centre back. It is
Yeah.
definitely Gabriel-esque and exactly the profile we're lacking.
Well, they've got young players, haven't they, PSG, but they've also got the likes of Marquinhos, Hakimi, Fabian Ruiz peppered into that team, even as Manu Dembele, what is he, about 29 now, wealth of experience in European football. So you say we've tried to mimic their model. We've omitted one key feature of that, which is adding players with pedigree and experience ultimately, which they do routinely.
I think the key point of difference is that wage cap. So those elite PSG forwards that sort of sprinkled across the side, padded out by top homegrown French, even Parisian predominantly talent, say you're attracting the best of the best with those wages. I think it's a statistic, a correlation as old as time. I think back to Soconomics, reading that well over a decade ago. And the clearest of correlations in terms of expenditure, outlay, and success is on the wages, not on the transfer fees. And yet, this Blue Co ownership, this Blue Co project, decided to do things completely the other way around.
With all of that in mind, George, you spoke to the individual quality of PSG's players, the strength of their squad. Felt like a pretty unnecessary advantage, didn't it? Having their fixture on the weekend postponed to give them extra days rest. Already 5-2 up. Chelsea, absolutely blowing a gasket at that point, completely out of steam following that Newcastle game where we could barely move. The writing was very much on the wall, but didn't really feel necessary, did it? This Paris Saint-Germain super team, the financial outlay to build that squad, the lack of competitive football domestically, that they needed to have that advantage. And it's obviously a relevant point now with the upcoming tie against Liverpool and Lens pushing back now against their request to have a further fixture postponed. I think that would be the right move, but unfair that we weren't able to benefit from, well, not even benefit, just to have the normal status quo resumed.
Totally. Completely eats into the integrity both of Liga, but also the Champions League. As you say, there's a clear competitive advantage being born there. And as you say, thankfully for Liverpool, but also for the Liga, it does look as if that title clash will take place, as it absolutely should be. There was a mass exodus for this game. So I think sub complete capacity from the get-go, in part down to the digital ticketing, the inability, the rigidity of not being able to pass on a ticket or resell has its merits, has its demerits. But there was a mass exodus on, I believe, minute sort of 70, 75. So mentioned we were in the pub nearby. It was absolutely packed come that second half. Where do you stand on this? Fans abandoning the side, admittedly 3-0 down, 8-2 down, tie out of sight.
I think fans can do whatever they want. They're consumers paying for this product. It's their precious free time. They can make the informed choice at that point to get the hell out of there once the game is when the tie is done and dusted. I don't think there's much to get behind with this team. Ultimately these players, Jamie Gittins on the bench, injured in the medical room for the best part of 6 months, gets his full salary each week. Wesley Fofana's done that for 5 years that he's been at Chelsea. Fans are the one that, are at the short end of the stick, for want of a better phrase. And yeah, they're well within their rights to exit as they see fit.
Completely agree here. I think that triple substitution, so Cole, João, Enzo, was a complete admission that the game was gone. There was no chance of a revival. And while myself, I'm sort of very reluctant to leave the ground, often because I'm a romantic in the sense that I believe many a game is never done. But I do think in this scenario, say, odds were not even stacked against us, just completely impossible. And it does almost feel we're at the point now where a statement has to be made. So fans have paid £80 for those tickets, and yet you've got the likes of Wes Fofana chuckling on the bench, some shocking performances, and general management and running from the club above, crazy outlay, shocking showings, and perceivedly sporting directors with no accountability. So it does feel now talks of protests, talks of delayed attendance for match days with, I think, with that Manchester City game upcoming. does feel like the stat fans are going to have to do something radical to really call out the board, the ownership, and see some real change.
So George, we've obviously given Liam Rosenior a good chance now. When he came into the club and when he was first linked, he seemed like a pretty likable, genuine guy. But I think that new manager bounce has well and truly dissipated now, and we are seeing unprecedented levels of ridicule, even in this age of rampant social media memes. Aging men respecting the ball and losing matches.
It's not the first time we've termed our beloved football club Circus FC. There's never been a dull day with Chelsea, Seeding Blueco, Abramovich years, chaos left, right, and centre. But I do think this label has taken on new meaning with Rosenier's recent antics. So you touched upon respecting the ball, that ridiculous huddle around the centre circle, which Paul Tierney has recently cameoed. You're drawing attention to yourself totally unnecessarily. For me, it's clearly irritating, akin to Arteta infringing on a technical area. You touched upon the paper notes, notably to Garnacho in the dying minutes of that PSG game, 8-2 down, tie completely out of sight. It's performative, posturing, and ultimately it's tone deaf. I think Emmanuel Petit labelled it childish and ultimately concluded, look, this is less efficient than a verbal messaging. The interviews on top, just generally, the oversharing at every possible opportunity. I think early days we called out it was slightly Amorim-esque, less is more. And this is particularly key when the results are sliding. So you might argue it's sort of just optics, surface level. But as we've touched upon in recent weeks, the modern era is one of hysteria. So the narrative that follows a club is undoubtedly, undeniably part of a fan experience. I just think these antics, on top of, as say, the sliding performances, a couple of really damaging defeats of late, just really add and stoke the fire, making us easiest of targets for opposition fan bases, talk shows, etc. And actually, I won't say cloud a judgment because there's a clear decline in performance, but say exacerbate takes from fans, opposition alike. Strikingly, there was a statistical comparison, league form versus Maresca. And yes, we've probably had favourable fixtures since Rosenier's come in, and we are sliding. But ultimately, we are still at parity / favourable even on a lot of those metrics. So chances created, concession on goal, points per game, etc. But all the antics, all the extra that drives ridicule has us in a position where the sacking very much feels on the horizon.
Yeah, I think the early signs with Liam Rosenior, he was very much relying on his man management abilities and his capacity to connect with players one on one that I thought was going to allow him to make a difference with this squad and forge positive, healthy relationships with these players. But as results have started to nosedive and plummet and overall performances have become more drab, I think some of these wider antics you see from Rosenior, the note taking, the slightly performative gestures on the side of the pitch, in the press conferences as well. Some of these things like, the huddles. I mean, what the hell is that about? There was a slight renewed iteration of that from the comical scenes at Stamford Bridge against Newcastle, where the referee was trapped in the middle of our huddle. We had this bizarre handshake happen in the middle of the Everton away huddle, and I think you're seeing the consequences of that, you know, in the press, but also players on the bench as well. We see Enzo Fernandez openly talking about passing Chelsea now. I think he's clearly had enough. I mean, we've had enough of him equally. Wesley Fofana chirping and making jokes on the bench whilst we're 8-2 down to Paris Saint-Germain. I think this is a club in dire need of leadership on and off the pitch, and ultimately that starts with the manager, and Liam Rosenior simply does not have those tools in his toolbox.
You mentioned we were welcoming of the appointment. I think you'd borne presence to his oratory skills. I think from my side, it was more a case of frustration with Maresca. And yeah, hold our hands up. We were definitely more willing to give him a chance than others, despite his CV. Whether it was hope, desperation, or dislike for Maresca more than anything else, we were hoping he was going to be this breath of fresh air. So I think early days, you saw Joe Pedro's form improve. There was that interview where there was camaraderie between the two of them. He was potentially reaching them on a more personal level. But I do think that mate gimmick is potentially not a one size fits all, and that now is spilling into a loss of control. So you mentioned Wes Fofana laughing on the bench. I think Cole's had a lot to say about his form and how he's loving life under Liam, but we're yet to see that translate into performances. I very much want to see our performances on the pitch do the talking. I think even the optics of that Esteval glare at Rosenior's missed control on the touchline against Arsenal, all these little things start to add up at this sense that the manager's just not been taken seriously. And I do want to say that importance of optics. I am a big believer that rightly or wrongly, initial resistance to an appointment often does become insurmountable. So I look back Chelsea's example at Benitez, even Pochettino, but for the two of them, it was the Liverpool ties, the Spurs ties. There was that slight slash strong resistance from the Chelsea fan base to that appointment to begin with. And I just think, I'm trying to think of many examples in football where that's been reversed, where there is that resistance. In Liam's case, the lack of CV coupled with the David Brent-esque comments, persona, as a manager, you have to be incredible to turn the tide. You've got to overcome not only the difficulty of the challenge, but also the pre-existing resistance, doubt within a fan base. I do wonder, ironically, whether that talk, that bluster is what secured him the job. So in the absence of the CV, him looking new, looking radical, etc. Clearly, we're clearly enamoured with Wyn Stewart's bluster over the years, so much so that they're not remotely held to account. Have they fallen foul to his sort of philosophical, performative posturing?
Contrary to what I said earlier, I said all of this ultimately starts with the manager, the source of all of this. Um, Lack of seriousness we see from players, the groans of disgruntlement that we're seeing in recent weeks from the likes of Cole and Enzo. But actually, it goes well above Rosenior. I think as a player at Chelsea right now, you're looking around the whole club, and it's comical. You see players who aren't good enough to be in the squad all around in every position currently for Chelsea. You've got coaching staff in situ who are simply not qualified. I mean, for all the jokes around Callum McFarlane steadying the ship for a few weeks following Maresca's departure, like, is he really qualified to be Chelsea's assistant manager? He was our under 21 manager of an underperforming youth side for a couple of years, and that's about it. You look up and you look at the senior leadership on the footballing director side of things, and you've got Paul Winstanley and Lawrence Stewart, who are the embodiment of clownish incompetence. They are a source of ridicule within the industry now. I remember the Sports Business Awards back in 2025. They were nominated for technical director of the year, which was to the amusement of everyone else in the room, supposedly. These are two utter frauds who are completely wedded to a strategy that doesn't work and doubling down, tripling down at every opportunity. So all throughout the club, this rot is prevalent from players to coaching staff, senior sporting leadership and ownership, ultimately with Egbali, who seems to have his tentacles firmly around the club and is wreaking havoc across the entire Chelsea Football Club.
I think the sad reality is that two fixed, or should I say, sunk costs are this bet, the fact that we're wedded on these long-term contracts. So a lot of the playing staff are here to stay, can't easily be shifted at the very least. And on top of that, as you said, head or heads of the snake. When Stanley and Stewart seem to be set in stone, completely unaccountable, but for abject failures on the pitch and ultimately in financials that we predict will be coming home to roost. Sadly, what that means in tandem is that the only position where we're realistically going to arrest the tide and see the project come together has to be an elite manager. The two of us were positive about Rosenier's appointment. I'd love nothing more than for him to turn the tide. He seems to be a thoroughly likable bloke, despite erring on performative, which I think we both agree is probably compensating for ultimately, lack of CV, lack of stature for the job that is Chelsea FC, a mammoth club. And you had Thomas Tuchel in the crowd at that PSG game. I ultimately think to arrest this tide with those fixed conditions, you are going to need creme de la creme from the managerial front to really arrest the decline and conjure up something that resembles an elite football club that we purport to be. In the absence of any opposition this week for the Blues, we wanted to discuss the increasing prospect of Enzo Fernandez away. To discuss this one, we're welcoming back debut podcast from last week. So nice, we had to do it twice. Joey Scanlon, welcome back, mate.
Thank you, mate. Yeah, I must say, thanks for having me back, because pretty sure it was the night before, you know what, and I think I might have been a bit of a bad luck charm. Might have spoken some of that ill performance into existence, but grateful for the second chance.
Glowing reviews for your performance last week, even if the same can't be said for Chelsea's. But how do you see this one? Say Enzo himself refusing to rule out a change of scenery in the summer, in the aftermath
Enzo,
of that PSG game.
yeah, thanks, George. Enzo's always been a tricky one for me, and I think actually that's probably quite similar for most Chelsea fans. I've always defended him. I was real big fan of him when he arrived, and he was playing that kind of like South American five role under Potter and Lampard. And I appreciate we were pretty dire back then, but his passing, I remember him connecting with João Felix. He had this game where we lost 4-0 against Man United, and he was brilliant, and he played for the badge. And I've always found that he's played for the badge, and I've appreciated him for that. And so I've defended him, and I've definitely admired his evolution over the last few seasons. And I think a few different managers have got a few different things out of him. Whilst he's not the prettiest on the eye, I think people realise he's a bit of a glue player, and he really works there. It's not to say he's irreplaceable, but kind of looking at the situation now, my kind of constant concerns around his petulance and his immaturity are starting to kind of leak into his external facing stuff. And I think that's where the concern is. My main concern, though, really about this is, I do think there's legs on him leaving. I think his agent will be shopping him around. I saw a brief from Fabrizio earlier where Vitinha was asked, and he was kind of adamant, I'm not leaving PSG. Caicedo today, as we've seen, was asked, and he was pretty adamant. And Enzo he did leave the door open. There was an initial mistranslation. I appreciate that, but he's kind of doubled down on that and left it deliberately vague. But the real concern is if he does leave, is it's what it says about the project. I've always been a bit of a blind optimist with this project. I see it. I think PSG are an example of the fact that it can work if you've got the right level of ambition, which I think maybe we don't have. But with Enzo, if he's to go, he was our first big money signing. He was the wage structure. He was the £100 million man. I think we all remember where we were that January transfer window when we've got him over the line, and we've really felt like we were back and we'd grabbed someone. And if he were to go, my concern is it's the first person in the project to come and go before there's been really much success. I know we had the Club World Cup And that's the concern. It's the domino effect. It's his role with the Spanish players, the Cucureas. Do they all kind of start to look elsewhere? They're all kind of this age now where they don't feel as young as they did. And I think they'll be aware of the fact that they don't seem to be on an upward trajectory. I know he was particularly close with Maresca too. And I think that will be a major factor in this. But it's just whether this kind of brings out a lot of that dirt on him, on the Maresca departure, that is, and what we haven't seen in the smoke and mirrors through the briefings. And I just worry about what this kind of could cause for the confidence of the squad and for the fans in what we're trying to build.
I firstly want to call out just how predictably disappointing this development is. The fact that we will see talk regarding his future fresh in the aftermath of a humiliation, ultimately at the hands of PSG at Stamford Bridge. This coming from the matchday captain, someone who's been a vice captain and frequently given the armband in Reece James' absence, the poster boy ultimately for the Blue Co project, and as you mentioned, frequently branded as proper Chelsea for his passion gimmick that he seems to have run in recent years. In terms of the player, obviously, since we sort of semi-bashed him back in episode 2, we have praised him for a handful of performances. West Ham, Brentford showings come to mind. I did think he was decent in losing causes in the Carabao against Arsenal. But crucially, these have come in Cole's absence and have undoubtedly disappeared since Cole's return. I think this is the key. We've long stated Enzo, Cole, Caicedo are just not compatible in a midfield three against opposition remotely worth their salt. You add Lavia into that mix, and we're talking about £300 million plus spunked in the name of incompetent squad building. It's just ridiculous that we're in a position now where there's very real talk around further midfield recruitment. And I think that's ultimately what it comes down to. The fact that Enzo, of the core three, the star boys, is undoubtedly the most expendable. So third midfielder in a midfield three, or potentially best deployed in that diamond setup, unique to Argentina and the international scene.
The year is 2026, and it feels like season 6 or 7 of unlocking Enzo Fernandez. I mean, this is a player who has outlived now, I think it is 7 managers for Chelsea in total. And along with Wesley Fofana, feels like one of these players that has this sort of reputational feeling of invincibility with Chelsea fans, this idea that he's world class with almost no evidence to back that up. He's been trialed in just about every position across midfield, sitting at the base of that midfield, forming part of a pivot alongside Moises Caicedo in particular. And I think the position he landed on where, he could do pretty much the least damage to Chelsea was central attacking midfield. And now that even seems to have pivoted now due to our dwindling options in attacking positions. He's now been pushed to left wing frequently. So this is, at best, a luxury midfielder. All he really offers for Chelsea, if we're being honest, and looking beyond all the hype and the gas, is box crashing and the occasional performance where he's tenacious and his passing is on point. This is a third man in a 3-man midfield, a luxury player at best, who isn't able to form a partnership with our best player, Moises Caicedo.
I think it's interesting you raised that unlocking Pogba parallel. There's been a viral clip of Rosenior criticising Pogba as a pundit, much mocked. But ultimately, I think Enzo, the elephant here, does exactly what Rosenior decried of Pogba. So he floats, he vacates the spaces that others are required to then fill and makes them lesser players. I think we all agree Moises was on steroids for the best part of that first half of the season. 1-man midfield under Maresca, constantly cleaning up, and he's ultimately just run out of steam. So I do think, particularly in the context of the precarious financials we've discussed last week, he is easily the most expendable.
Look, on the footballing side of it, I'm not here to fully defend him. I've always seen Caicedo as the superior player. I think, the whole fan base will do that. But I wonder whether we don't understand the value he has to that team, because I would say that he does go missing on quite a few games, and I think that's borderline unforgivable. But there just seems to be a bit of an element of he does a lot of the dirty work. He works hard. He doesn't look great doing it, but he's always there. And to have that level of flexibility between attack and defense, you mentioned there, we imagine we played Parma with Caicedo and Lavia behind him. There feels like we're missing that link player, and I appreciate there are players of that profile out there on the market. I'm sure, I'm not a scout, but I think people are always being very quick with the grass is greener with Chelsea. We're used to that. We've been brought up on a transfer policy even under Abramovich that was cutthroat. It was a heavy rotated. There was a revolving door of brilliant players coming and going. But we paid 100 million for someone of Enzo's quality, and I do think we'd be able to recoup all, if not the majority of that back. I think, just purely due to the contract situation, which again has always been something I've been in favour of. I think if you're going to take big punts on these players, you've got to lock them down under big contracts and avoid, as you say, the Mbappe situation. But, I would always just warn other fans, if not Enzo, then who? And does he have a profile that we don't truly understand?
Oh, Saudi Arabia, who are looking to go on a bit of a spending spree by all accounts again, maybe once the war subsides. I can't see anyone in top European leagues forking out that much. You'd be much better placed investing that money in Sandro Tonali, for instance, someone who I've seen recent comparisons to Enzo Fernandez on X, who has simply far more to his game than the Argentinian. He's far more combative. He's got better shooting. He's tenacious in the tackles constantly. He's able to form midfield partnerships with a variety of players based on Newcastle's injuries and availability. So that's the kind of player I think anyone in market would be looking at. Even Bruno Guimaraes, not to be totally fixated on Newcastle, but Enzo Fernandez. It's so frustrating. It's one of these things that you just wish you could generate a consensus around the reality, which is this player is an absolute fraud and has been for 90 to 95% of his time at Chelsea, bar a few moments, a few memorable performances, few and far between. But it feels like we're stuck with him because I can't see anyone taking him off our hands. Similar with Wesley Fofana.
The one silver lining to that clout, that regard in the game, whether it's an army of bots, marketing, links with Fabrizio Romano and the likes, would be potential stock value. So you'd have to hope your Atleticos deem a PSG under Enrique far too astute not to see through that. But maybe Perez looking for a so-called Galactico rather than really judging and valuing a player might come to our benefit. Saudi, in the same vein, be a great option, but you fear Enzo's not got his sights set there personally. But I too totally agree. I mean, he's consistently praised for the numbers he produces from centre midfield. We've often stated we're talking about a number 10 here, particularly in Cole's absence. He's been deployed very high, often pressing as a striker, often finding himself in behind João Pedro. The 8 goals, 3 assists he's produced in the league include penalties. And I'll reiterate, we're talking about just 3 assists here. This alleged world-class passing range has been seen far few and far between. But if we can target the right replacement, which is crucial, we talk about an ever-dwindling squad lacking quality, where at a Elliot Anderson type or a Adam Wharton, I think I'd be keen to cash in. But given,
I think Elliot over Adam. I love Adam, but he's another luxury player. He's another Lavia. I just think Elliot just seems to have this all-encompassing profile. I just think we're lacking that physicality in that midfield. I know we have Caicedo in there, but he's actually not that tall and he covers a lot of ground. I think we really need someone who can muscle up against a tall centre attacking mid or a striker even, and kind of throw his weight around, which Enzo tries to do. But I agree, actually that reminds me of the point. I look at our squad, we're tiny. It's a tiny team out there. That's why Arsenal's corners was terrifying when we last played them, because it's just boys v men. So maybe that's one of the elements I'm probably ignoring a little bit. My rose tinted glasses is Enzo's physical profile. I think he's a brilliant pass for the ball, but has he got much else than that? I think the leadership qualities, I couldn't agree with you more. I think we're starting to see through that. I find him really petulant. Same with Neto. I think these guys, they have this gimmick where they're fired up, but I think really they're fired up in quite a selfish way. I don't really see them. I know Enzo will, whenever there's a good goal, will go headbutt Reece, and get involved with that. But when the going gets tough, I don't see him picking people up, and I see him giving up a bit. I think it's a bit of a South American thing. Like I don't want to generalize, but I think these guys aren't used to that level of atmosphere and that level of kind of embarrassment that you feel in the Prem when you 3-0 down at Everton. That must have been a real tough one for a lot of those players. And where's our leader? I was talking to my mum's boyfriend. He's a long-term Chelsea fan, and he just says they just don't look the same team without Reece. And Enzo's supposed to be the vice captain, and he just doesn't fill that gap for me.